You don't want to miss this podcast if you're struggling with a disability while trying to hold on to your job. I'm Doug Massey, the president of AFGE Local 17 at the Department of Veterans Affairs Central Office here in Washington, D.C. And today we have a special guest, Eric Pines, a nationally recognized federal employment attorney, a union counsel, and one of the most trusted voices in the country when it comes to protecting federal workers' rights. Eric brings deep expertise in disability retirement and reasonable accommodations, and he's here to help you understand your rights and your options when continuing to work may no longer be possible. So let's get started. Eric,
Hi.
welcome. We're so glad to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. It really is an honor to be here. I enjoyed seeing some of the other podcasts and it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, let's get right into this. So, when somebody calls you, a federal employee calls you and says, I have a disability, I'm really struggling with work. What do you tell that person?
So we start with what is your disability? And what's so interesting about the federal government is disability, whether something's considered a disability really relates to what we're speaking about, the context. For example, are we talking about reasonable accommodation? Because if so, then you have to look at the Rehabilitation Act, which is the ADA for federal employees. There's one definition there. If we're talking about workers' compensation, there's a completely different definition, Social Security disability, which federal employees are entitled to also. There's a very strict definition there. And then now, if kind of what we're going to talk about today, OPM disability, there's a definition of disabled, which really in this case means are you unable to do the job you were assigned to do? So I start by finding out what context are they asking me in as to whether or not they're disabled.
So can you just walk us through the process? Say you have a consultation with an employee and you realize there's really no reasonable accommodation, meaning there's nothing that can be given so this person can do the essential job functions. And so what is that process like?
Okay, so if someone comes to me, like you were saying, that's the first question I say, is this something you would like us to help you fight? And we do reasonable accommodation cases too. Would you like us to help? I say, let's always start big picture. What's the goal here? Is the goal to keep that job, or is the goal to get on disability retirement or workers' compensation, whatever it is? So once we get that clear, let's assume the answer to that question is no, I can't work anymore. As you said, I'm unable to do my job. Then I jump right in and we ask them, well, first of all, if they meet the requirements for disability retirement for federal employees, which can be called OPM disability interchangeably with FERS disability, a lot of different names, federal disability retirement. But we try to make it very clear that there's a difference between disability retirement for federal employees, the ones I just mentioned, FERS, OPM, and Social Security, which you have to apply for. You can't just apply for disability retirement if you're a FERS employee, which is most people today, until you apply for Social Security first. So we go through what the requirements are for Social Security, which are much stricter. Should be that you can't do gainful employment at all. And the requirements for disability retirement for federal employees, which is a much more lenient standard. And many times I'm shocking people because I'm telling them all you need to do is get a doctor to say that you cannot provide useful and efficient service in your position for at least 1 year. And like my firm, we would actually work with the doctor and draft that letter on their behalf and go through the requirements. But if you've got that doctor, if you've got that person supporting you and they say that they've seen your PD and you can't do that job for at least 1 year, well, then you're on your way to getting disability retirement as a federal employee.
Now, what you said kind of struck me. So the standard is you can't do your job. So for example, if I'm an attorney at the Board of Veterans Appeals, I have a disability, I'm unable to do that job, but I could do a job at a much lower grade. So I would still qualify for basically OPM or disability retirement.
It's a great question, and it's a dangerous thing to be aware of because the answer to your question strictly, let's start with a strict answer, is if you can show that your position description that you're assigned to, you are unable to do that for at least 1 year, and they use the term useful and efficient service, which is a term of art. It just basically means you can't do your job. You're fine. But if but there is a process of reasonable accommodation that the agency is supposed to go through with you. And if they don't, they're violating the law that we talked about earlier, the Rehabilitation Act. So they're supposed to go through that and try to find you another job. And there will be a form that's submitted when you apply for disability retirement called the 3112D form. That form,
Mhm.
if you've requested reasonable accommodation. So to answer your question specifically, generally the agency is going to work with you, they're supposed to, and try to come back and see if they can find a position. But if they offer you a position and it's lower graded, here's the kicker. You do not need to take that. Nobody requires
Okay.
the government to take a lower graded position or a position that you're not qualified to take. However, if they offer you a position and you choose to take it and you can do that job, you basically killed your chances of getting disability retirement. So you have to be careful.
Hmm.
And the agency is supposed to do a search. A lot of times they call it well, it is called that search when they cannot accommodate you in your job is called the accommodation of last resort. They're supposed to look for positions in your commuting area within your grade. And if they come back and they provide you with something that's in your grade, you really kind of have to take it if you're qualified. Generally, they don't, though. I find it's about 98% of the time they don't find the job. They just kind of want to get,
Mhm.
especially today, the VA wants to get rid of employees, as we know, thanks to Doge and other things. But if they do find you a position, you have to be careful not to turn it down if you're qualified for it. Now, lastly, if they offer you a position that is downgraded, you do not need to take it. In fact, you better not take it if you want disability retirement.
All right. So you do have to apply for Social Security disability, but you don't have to get it to be qualified for the OPM disability retirement. Is that what you're saying initially?
Uh, Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. It's
Okay.
interesting. Our firm does Social Security disability appeals, which interestingly are contingency. You don't get paid unless the person recovers, and the employee doesn't have to pay you. The money comes from the government out of the back pay. So, but when my firm assists you, we'll assist you with that initial. If you, let's say you were to hire us to do disability retirement for federal employees, we will assist you with filing, which is as simple as going online to Social Security's website and just entering the information. And you don't need to get it. And 90% of the time, our clients don't get Social Security disability. The ones who are really disabled usually hire us to help them with the appeal if they don't get it. But generally, people are not getting Social Security disability. And this is something I really want to hit home on. If you're going to go to your doctor and you're
Mhm.
going to ask if you're disabled, I should say, you're going to ask if they're willing to support you for disability. Make it crystal clear to them that you're only asking them if you can do your position. You're not a lot of times doctors don't know this that there's such a lenient
Mhm.
standard in with FERS disability retirement. They're thinking you're talking about Social Security, and they're like, we're not going to say that he can't work at all or she can't work at all. But if you tell them, no, 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 this is unique. I don't need to get Social Security. I just need you to verify that in a document or in with records or with a letter from an attorney, whatever, that says specifically, I cannot do the essential functions or provide useful and efficient service in my position of record. That's the key.
Mhm. So it sounds to me like the way it all works is when a client comes to talk to you and says, you know what, I have a disability, whether it's a psych, I'm having difficulty getting my job done. It sounds like the first thing you would do, you would explore, okay, well, is there a reasonable accommodation so you can do your job, so you can do the essential functions? And you go through that process. And if that doesn't seem to work out, there's the accommodation of last resort, but do not take something lower graded. And then if it is, then you switch over and say, all right, let's take a look at the OPM, the disability retirement. Is that kind of the process that you go
That
through?
that that was perfectly articulated. It's interesting. In my firm, we um, we don't charge people to review their case when it comes to disability retirement.
Mhm.
So if they come to us, we'll walk them through that and we'll figure that out for them. But if they come to us with questions about reasonable accommodation, a lot of times we'll recommend, hey, why don't we do a case review, which we do charge for, by the way, because we give 2 hours of advice, solid advice, to
Mhm.
talk them through maybe protecting and saving their job and not having to file for disability, or to tell them they might have an EEO case that they could file, and we can assist them with that. So we start with, hey, what do you want? Do you want disability? If they want disability, then we give them the honest truth. We don't want their case, or we don't want to them do anything unethical. If they can't qualify,
Mhm.
we'll tell them that. But if they don't, if they want to keep their job, we will actually, represent them and fight for them. And truthfully, that's my love, my passion is fighting those reasonable accommodation cases for two reasons. Number one is because the law is on the employee's side, which we know in the federal
Mhm.
government. You must know this as well as anybody, that it's very hard for many of these cases, these discrimination cases or or it's just hard to win a case. But
Oh
these
yeah.
cases, but when it comes to disability retirement, the law is on the employee's side. It's not hard to show you're disabled, number
Mhm,
one, and the agency, since it's one of the largest employers in the world, I think it's
mhm.
number four, cannot say it's an undue hardship on them for financial reasons.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of federal employees don't understand this process. And I know from a union perspective, when people come to us and there's a disability retirement issue, we say you need to go to contact a law firm to get this process moving. And so, say go call Eric Pines. He understands the process. But and I think a lot of the questions that employees have is how long does it generally take? So if somebody's like, all right, reasonable accommodation, it's not going to work out, um, from the process of applying for Social Security to the time they're going to get their disability retirement, what's the time frame like generally?
So I always tell people if you're going to reach out to our firm, it's going to take us on average 2 to 3 months to put your application together, because in
Mhm.
addition to drafting that doctor's letter, which we do often, you have to work with your agency and get them to fill out certain forms, and that's a back and forth process. You have to deal with HR. The supervisor needs to fill out a form. The legal reasonable accommodation person, or your EEO office has to fill out that accommodation form. So you've got that 2 to 3 months average
Mhm.
for just gathering everything to get it together to submit it. Now, if you're still employed, your agency will submit it. That's just what the law requires. Even if you're working with a law firm or doing it on your own, your agency is going to have to submit the application. If you're separated, you can apply up to 1 year. That's a good thing to know as well. You can, if you've been separated, if you take, let's say, this deferred retirement, you still have a year after that deferred retirement ends, that fork in the road ends, to apply. You can apply for that and you can get disability retirement. So to answer your question, is once you do submit that application after that 2 to 3 month average, you're looking at, on average, I'm seeing about 9 months. Now, there are some people that are so disabled that they'll get fast tracked through OPM. Someone who has cancer or something very serious, God forbid,
Mhm.
um, they might get a quicker response, but you got to go lately with around 9 months. And I know President Trump and Doge them have cut back on a number of people in OPM, so that may slow down a little bit. I also read the other day that they hired an outside firm, A76, whatever. They hired somebody who's not a federal employee, so maybe that'll speed things up. Maybe it'll slow things down. Who know? From our perspective, probably slow things down. But make a long
Oh,
story
it'll
short is
slow things down. Yeah, it'll slow
right.
things down.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's
We
gonna be a
we have
mess.
our biases, but they're well earned. So
Well, all right. And, I think another big question that people have in mind is, all right, say I have 20 years of federal service, I'm in my 50s. And if you take disability retirement, the OPM retirement, what does that get you? I mean, what kind of advantages do you have? Or say you're closer, say you have the minimum requirements to retire, but you're not quite there to get the really, you have 25 years in or you're 50 years old. What are the advantages for getting disability retirement? Do you keep your health insurance, and what's the annuity look like, the pension?
great. Okay, so before I go into that, I want to point out a few other things that probably should make clear, because some of these things are non-starters for people. You have to
Mhm.
have 18 months of creditable service. You can't have just started the job. You have to have that medical condition that lasts 1 year. It has to be that you cannot perform useful and efficient service. And here's the key that's going to tie into your question specifically. You can't have reached 62 already. Once you reach age 62, you automatically switch to regular retirement, or you just can't apply for disability. Even though technically you might be able to apply, you can't get disability retirement because they're just going to immediately switch you to regular retirement. And if you don't qualify, it's too bad, because once you hit 62, you can't get disability retirement. So that's the outside bounds. But I want to answer the question you asked, because it's one of my favorite things to say. I like to say that, like, when I hear about what this benefit is, of course, everything's with the caveat that you've got to do things ethically and you must be legitimately disabled. But let's assume you are legitimately disabled. I like to say that I'm jealous of the benefits. That is a benefit
Mhm.
that, what I'm about to tell you, is mind-boggling. What the federal government offers you financially, it does not exist in the private sector. It does not exist anywhere else. Here's what it is, and you'll get it when I'm done. It's like this: for the first year, let's just take a hypothetical person who makes $100,000. I think it's the best way to explain it. Let's say you make $100,000 and you're 40 years old. Let's say you get disability. First of all, let's say the last 6 months you couldn't come to work because you were too sick, so you were on leave without pay. as long as you don't go back to work for even one day, and whatever you do, don't go back to work for one day if you're applying for disability and hope to get it, then you will get a check for 60% of your pay. So we're at $60,000 now, right? Back to the last day you were in a pay status. So you're going to get a back pay check for days you were already not paid. Then 1 year from that date, let's assume that was 6 months ago. So there were 6 months ahead now. We jumped ahead a year. Then you switch to 40%. So then you're at $40,000. So then you're getting $40,000 until I think we said this hypothetical person was age 40. So the next, they're now 41. The next 19, or I'm sorry, I'm a lawyer. Do I have to do math? Sorry. Let's think it's 21 years. The next 21 years, you're going to get that $40,000. And to answer your question, you're going to get your federal health benefits because you're retired. This is a form of retirement. So you've got your FEHB. And to answer a question you didn't ask, they're going to pay into your retirement, your first retirement, as if you're still employed. So when you hit age 62 and you switch over, you will have another 19, 20 years of credible service. And the entire time you can work in another job, and you're not doing anything wrong. You're allowed to work another job as long as it's not the same exact type of job, right? Because otherwise you're not doing something ethical. But just any other type of job, let's say it's a part-time job or a contractor or something like that, you can work in that job and make up to 80% of your salary. So if we're using that hypothetical,
really something.
yeah, it is amazing. So if you take our hypothetical, in that first year, the person's making $79,999 in our hypothetical, and they're 60,000. They're making $139,000 before they were making 100. They've got their government benefits. They're working part time. So it's funny. The reason I know this so well is I started my practice doing this, representing someone in an MSPB case about 20 years ago, and he did his own disability application. He said to me, I can't make over 80%. What if I start your OPM disability department for you, and you just pay me up to my 80%? And that's what we did. And he helped me develop the whole practice and that area, get the passion for that area. And he was, and that's a great example of someone when that he's able to make a lot more than he made before, work a lot less, and get all his benefits.
That's amazing. So that's how you learned from one of your clients how to do this. Okay. Because I have heard about this when I began my, union career 12 years ago. And we were always, I heard a little bit about it. Like, you don't have to be, completely disabled. Just, you can't do your job. And there's a lot of great things. You keep your health insurance, but I didn't know the extent of it. And, we've had clients and we refer them to, attorneys that do this work. And there's a lot in the area. And I gotta say, we are very fortunate to have you because I've heard about you for years. And I knew there's a lot of AFGE locals that use you. And when I asked one of our attorneys in the area who we frequently use, she said, "Oh yeah, Eric Pines, he does this. He's the best." And so we just want to say thank you so much for being here. And are there any pieces of advice you'd like to leave employees or anything else? You don't see this changing in the near future because I know they're trying to cut, federal pensions, and this is not on the chopping block. Is that correct?
I haven't heard of this on being on the chopping block, though. I can foresee one way where it for sure would be. I know that there's in front of Congress, there's some ideas of changing the high 3 to the high 5. I would assume that would go across the board since this is a form of retirement. So it could decrease if you're going at your high 5, you've got 2 years of lower pay into that equation. That being said, it's probably not going to make that big a difference. It certainly wouldn't be a reason why I wouldn't apply for disability because you're still getting one of the best benefits there is, just not quite as perfect. No, I don't. Listen, I wouldn't put anything past, what we're going through right now. We understand that we're going through a period of transition, but as of now, there's nothing I've seen anywhere that has, other than that 5-year thing, that has diminished this idea. And like I said, people are taking VERAs, people are taking VSIPs, these buyouts, people are taking the forks in the road. Disability retirement ties in perfectly because you're gonna get your full pay, and then when that ends, first of all, that's going to carry you for a period of time while you wait for that application to go through. There's no guarantee you'll get disability, obviously. But if you do, the back pay will just start when the full pay ends. So my thought is it seems to be a pretty solid way to go. And if I was a federal employee thinking of leaving and I was disabled, it would be a no-brainer that and just to finish what you were saying about Social Security, you also should apply. Well, you have to apply for Social Security, but like I said, that's a 5-minute online process. And if you really believe you're that disabled, then you might want to seek out an attorney to help you with that. But at the same time, you for sure, um, it's just really a formality as far as OPM disability is concerned. That's that. The last thing I would just say is to answer your question is what I would want a person to know is if you want a thorough analysis of what's the best idea for you. I can't tell you how many people come to us with that for that initial case review and they're like, I want to fight this case because they're not accommodating me. And then I explain to them, like I just did in this podcast, how amazing disability retirement is. Like it takes them a day or two to process because nobody wants to feel like they're retired and they're not going to work again. But when they recognize they can still work in another job, many times they're just like, you know what, let's just switch to disability retirement. Or sometimes, interestingly, we'll file that EEO case and we'll use it as leverage and we'll settle the case with the agency to work together to try and help the person get disability retirement, which is not something that your agency can guarantee because OPM makes that decision. But they do fill out forms in a certain way, and they can. One thing I would say is probably the last thing I'd leave you with is if you're very disabled, there is a presumption if you're removed from your job for a medical reasons. It's called medical inability to perform. So many times we'll enter into settlements when someone's disabled and we'll say, look, let's just agree to let this person go out for medical reasons. They can attach that medical removal to their OPM application, or if they've already applied, we can forward that to OPM with a CSA number. And they will get that immediate presumption, which will increase their chances of getting disability. And they don't have to spend money on an attorney other than that kind of like flat fee to get that disability application. So that'd probably be what I'd leave you with.
Well, a couple of things. The whole, the proposed legislation to cut our federal pensions. Hopefully I don't think that's going to go through the Senate or the complete version, but it does make a big difference. It's not just, going from the high threes to the high fives. Somebody told me he calculated it would be like a $300 less in his pension, which is something when you have a pension.
Sure.
And then, they're coming after everything. In fact, one of our colleagues said, I'm surprised they're not, instead of the high fives, they're not doing the low threes, because they just, as you know, this is a very difficult time for federal employees. What they're doing is they just want us out, and they're doing everything they can. The return to office, cramming people in small cubicles, threatening people with RIFs. And it's just a very demoralizing place. And I think this is the first time that, we always get a certain amount of people thinking about their retirement, doing the calculations. They reach that age or that period of time. And now it's a lot more people. So I think this is just one more thing. Obviously, this is not disability retirement will not apply to the vast majority. But for those people who are disabled, and it's something like, hey, I've been able to do this job struggling at home, and I don't know if this is going to really work out. It's getting worse and worse. And I think this sounds like a really great option. And I think, like what you said, many people did not know about this. So we want to thank you for being here today. And by the way, I heard, are you going to be on a PBS show coming up soon? Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because that sounds exciting.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I'm going to be on the Aaron Harbor show, which is on PBS in Colorado. Maybe I have a YouTube channel. Also, I could put maybe a link up there or something. And I have a podcast. Actually, I have a podcast that speaks about a lot of these specific OPM issues. Maybe you could put a link up to that. They could like the podcast, but it'd be amazing. But to answer your question, yes, I'm very excited about it. I get to speak out. A lot of the things you just mentioned about how federal employees are being mistreated. I speak about that as it relates to VA employees. And, hopefully I can do my little part to fight for the people I believe in. My favorite thing, what I love about the VA is that these people have devoted their lives to our country, and they wanted to give back, and the discipline and I feel like they need to be appreciated, and look, nobody's perfect. The government's not perfect, and I say that in the video is nobody there's always two sides to every story, but the reality is when you take broad swaths and you destroy things and you crush them, you're going to have to deal with the consequences. And so I talk about that a lot. To make a long story short, please look out for that. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be on your podcast. I really appreciated this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Eric. We'll be looking for that TV show, that PBS show. And I hope if anybody is out there, you're thinking about disability retirement, I encourage you to call Eric Pines. The phone number is there, 866-702-1433. Thank you very much, Eric. We appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciated being on.
Well, thanks, everybody. Just a couple of points. We've been getting a lot of questions about what's going on with, is the union still viable? And is there still official time where you can keep working for us? And the answer to that is very complicated. We know there's an executive order out there that's trying to strip us of our collective bargaining rights. It's tied up in litigation. Another union, NTEU, the National Treasury Employees Union, they just won a preliminary injunction in the federal court in DC saying like the President Trump cannot do this. I believe that there's another case, AFGE, obviously we have a case in California that could come out any day. It may have been coming out today while we've been doing this. And the government filed what's called declaratory judgment to basically that's asking the judge to say, the president can do this. This is completely legal. And that case was filed in Texas, kind of a strange jurisdiction where there's one judge who's kind of rubber stamps everything. So we will keep you posted, but for now, the collective bargaining agreement is in place at Local 17. We are still working for you. And if that changes, we will let you know as quickly as possible. So thanks for tuning in, and we will let you know when we're back again. Thanks.